Okay, let's unpack this. We've got some really foundational source material here. Excerpts from Bertrand Russell's Mysticism and Logic and other essays.
That's right. And Russell, in these essays, he's really getting at this deep tension, a clash he sees running right through the history of philosophy.
Attention. Between what?
Well, between two really powerful human impulses. You've got the mystical urge on one side, this desire for, immediate unified insight into the whole universe.
Okay, that sort of intuitive grasp.
Exactly. And on the other side, there's the scientific urge, which wants to understand the world bit by bit, piece by piece, through careful observation, analysis, reason.
Right. Two very different ways of trying to figure things out. And so our mission for this deep dive is to follow Russell as he makes this, well, pretty strong case for why philosophy needs to embrace the methods, the spirit of science.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to explore how he sees that approach as the way forward and contrast it with approaches driven more by that mystical intuition or maybe ethical biases he talks about.
Yeah, pulling out the core arguments, the key insights, and seeing what kind of picture of reality, of knowledge, even of the universe itself sort of emerges when you look through that specific Russellian lens.
It sounds like a way to see how logic and science can maybe shed light on these huge age-old philosophical questions.
Absolutely. We'll get into his thoughts on, intuition versus intellect, the really surprising things that modern math and logic reveal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and how our senses relate to physical objects, what causality actually means scientifically, and even the different ways we can, claim to know anything.
Okay, great. So let's jump straight in. That foundational conflict Russell identifies, mysticism versus science and philosophy. What does that look like on the ground?
Well, he sees these two impulses almost defining different ways of seeking truth. The mystical impulse, it's about getting that sudden, unified glimpse, like you said, an insight, seeing everything as one interconnected whole.
Less about building knowledge slowly, more about the aha moment.
Pretty much. Whereas the scientific impulse is, well, almost the opposite. It's methodical, it's analytical, it relies on the senses, on reason, breaking things down to understand how they work.
Does he see this playing out way back in ancient philosophy?
Oh, definitely. He points to figures like Heraclitus, famous for the idea of universal flux, everything changing, fire as the symbol.
Right. You can't step into the same river twice.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And Heraclitus had lines that sound very empirical, very grounded in observation, like, the things that can be seen, heard, and learned are what I prize the most.
Okay, sounds pretty scientific.
But then right alongside that, you get these deeply mystical statements like, wisdom is one thing. It is to know the thought by which all things are steered through all things. So Russell sees him as a kind of blend.
A mix. Interesting. But then you get someone like Plato, right? Russell sees him differently.
Yes, very much so. For Russell, Plato is a key example where that mystical impulse really takes over. I mean, think of his theory of ideas, these perfect forms in another realm.
And the allegory of the caves.
Exactly. The physical world is just shadows, right?
Right.
True reality is elsewhere. Russell argues that Plato's focus on accessing those higher realities through pure thought led to what he calls a divorce between philosophy and science. And he thought that was damaging for centuries.
So what are the hallmarks of this mystical approach? The metaphysical creed, as Russell puts it, that he's critiquing.
He picks out a few key characteristics. First, there's that belief, that insight, that sudden intuitive grasp is superior to slow analytical knowledge. It's seen as more profound.
The aha moment trumps careful reasoning.
Yeah. Second, a really strong belief in the oneness of everything, denying that divisions or distinctions are fundamentally real.
Like Heraclitus saying good and ill are one.
Right. Or Parmenides arguing that reality is just a single indivisible unity, which, as you think about it, is pretty counter to our everyday experience of distinct things.
Totally. What else?
A third one is the denial of the reality of time. If everything is truly one, then past, present, future, they kind of dissolve into a timeless unity. You see this idea in Parmenides, but also later in Spinoza, Hegel.
Everything just is.
In a sense, yes. And fourth, the belief that evil isn't truly real. It's just an appearance, an illusion that comes from our limited intellect dividing up the world. If you grasp the fundamental unity and goodness of the whole, evil vanishes.
Russell doesn't sound too convinced by this as a way to understand the world.
He's very critical. He acknowledges the mystical attitude that feeling of awe or connection might have value, but the metaphysical creed derived from it. He argues it's often just wishful thinking, born from emotion, trying to justify a feeling rather than finding objective truth. It's biased.
Which leads us into that debate he has about intuition versus intellect,
Yeah.
right, with Bergson.
Exactly. Bergson had this idea of two ways of knowing. Intellect goes around an object, analyzing it from the outside. Intuition enters into it, grasping its unique essence from within. Bergson thought intellect was mainly practical, for action, while intuition could grasp the absolute, especially our own inner self.
And Russell pushes back.
Hard. He says, wait a minute, instinct and intuition are really fallible, especially with complex philosophical stuff. We need reason, the intellect, to test our beliefs, check for consistency. He challenges Bergson's idea that intellect is only practical. Russell argues both intellect and intuition developed because they're useful when they give us truth.
So relying just on intuition is a non-starter for Russell.
Pretty much. He thinks it would mean abandoning the careful thought and analysis that built, well, civilization. Philosophy isn't just gut feeling for him, it needs intellectual rigor.
Okay, so if mysticism and pure intuition aren't the way forward for philosophy, what does Russell propose instead? How should philosophy operate?
The absolute key for Russell is that philosophy should look to science. But crucially, not for its results, which can change, right? Theories get updated.
Right.
But for its methods. Philosophy should adopt the scientific spirit, objectivity, careful analysis, building knowledge step by step based on evidence and logical reasoning.
He seems cautious about philosophies that just latch on to the latest scientific discovery and build a whole worldview from it.
Very cautious. He gives examples like, early philosophies putting humans at the center because we thought Earth was the center of the universe, or later evolutionism turning biological evolution into some kind of cosmic law of inevitable progress.
Letting time become its tyrant, as he put it.
Yeah. He sees these as smuggling in biases, ethical preferences, or just assuming humans are the be-all and end-all, anthropocentrism.
And he also pushes back against talking about the universe as if it's one single thing we can describe.
This is a really subtle but important point. He argues philosophical propositions should aim for generality. They should apply to all things individually, distributively, not just to some imagined single entity called the universe. Philosophy for him should be more like the science of the possible, figuring out what must be true in any possible world, not just describing contingent features of ours.
And the big advantage he sees in this scientific approach is
objectivity. Getting closer to understanding the world as it actually is, independent of our hopes and fears. It fosters a relationship with the world free from judging things as friendly or hostile to us. It's about achieving what he calls disinterested contemplation. Just looking.
So the method is everything. And he thinks a scientific education, especially mathematics, is vital for developing this philosophical mindset.
Absolutely vital. He sees education in this sense as forming mental habits, shaping your outlook. He contrasts a purely literary education, which he respects, but thinks can sometimes make you too focused on the past, maybe a bit disdainful of the present, with a scientific one.
What does scientific education offer specifically?
He highlights a few things. One is hopefulness. Unlike art, maybe, where progress often relies on singular genius, science allows for cumulative progress. Lots of people, even with moderate abilities, can contribute and build on what came before.
Like building blocks.
Exactly. Galileo, he says, helped establish that method of deciding based on fact, not just elegance. Science also fosters objectivity. It forces you to look for truth that's independent of your own passions or what you want to be true.
Galileo, again, choosing observation over the neat idea of perfect circles for orbits.
Right. Or Malthus using statistics, even if his conclusions were debated. It's the method of trying to ground things in impartial evidence.
It sounds like it trains the mind to face facts, pleasant or not.
That's the idea. And for this, he holds mathematics in incredibly high regard. He echoes Plato's idea of math having a kind of divine necessity. It possesses, for Russell, both truth and this supreme, cold, austere beauty.
An ordered cosmos for pure thought.
Yes, exactly. A realm where ideals are perfectly realized, unlike our messy actual world.
And how does math specifically train the philosophical mind?
Well, crucially, it teaches you how to deal with the general. Think about algebra using letters to represent any number. That trains you to think about relationships and structures that hold universally, not just for specific instances. Grasping the general is key to intellectual power.
And this connects to how modern math and logic, in his view, actually solves some really ancient philosophical puzzles, like Zeno's paradoxes.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really mind-bending. And Russell clearly loves this stuff. Zeno, centuries ago, posed these paradoxes about motion, infinity, continuity.
Achilles and the tortoise.
The classic, if the tortoise gets a head start and Achilles has to cover half the remaining distance, then half again, and so on, it seems like he can never quite catch up, right? There's always another little bit.
It seems logically impossible to cover an infinite number of points in a finite time.
Exactly. It stumped people for ages. But Russell explains how modern mathematicians Weierstrass, Dedekind, Cantor provided rigorous, logical definitions for infinity and continuity that dissolved the paradoxes.
And the key insight was about infinity itself.
Yes. Cantor's work on infinite sets showed something deeply counterintuitive. An infinite collection can have a part that's just as large, has just as many members as the whole collection.
Like the even numbers. There are just as many even numbers as there are whole numbers.
Precisely. You can pair them up 1 to 1, 1 with 2, 2 with 4, 3 with 6. Our intuition, based on finite sets that the whole must be bigger than the part, simply doesn't apply to infinite sets. Zeno's paradoxes rely on that faulty finite intuition. Once you accept the modern definition of infinity, the paradox disappears. Achilles does cover an infinite number of points, but in a finite time.
Wow. Okay, and what about continuity?
Similar story. Modern math defined continuity using only the concept of order and logical relations within a series, without needing vague ideas like infinitesimals or next points. Motion isn't some mysterious state of change, it's just being in different places at different times, with infinite intermediate places at infinite intermediate times.
It sounds simpler, in a way.
It's logically cleaner. Russell also highlights how geometry proofs shifted from relying on diagrams, which can be misleading, to purely logical deduction from explicitly stated axioms.
Getting rid of the pictures forces you to state all your assumptions.
Exactly. This rigor, pushed forward by logicians like Frege and Peano, and Russell himself, of course, revealed something profound. Modern logic and mathematics are essentially the same discipline. Reasoning itself, he argues, building on Leibniz's dream, could potentially become a kind of symbolic computation.
So logic isn't just about how humans happen to think.
No, that's a crucial point for Russell. It's not psychology. Modern logic investigates the immutable essence of all things actual and possible. It explores the structure of possibility itself. Mathematics, in this view, isn't something we invent. It's a world of abstract structures that reason discovers.
A world independent of us.
Independent of us and the messy physical world. A realm of pure truth.
Okay, that sets up the power of this scientific and logical method.
Yeah.
Now, how does Russell apply this lens to, well, the nature of reality itself? What about the stuff we actually perceive, sense data, physical objects?
Right. This is another area where he really shakes things up, challenging traditional views, especially idealism. Idealism tends to see what we immediately perceive, colors, sounds, textures, our sense data, as purely mental events existing only in the mind.
Yeah, that seems intuitive in a way. My perception feels like it's in here.
Russell argues strongly against that. He proposes that sense data are actually physical. They are part of the material world itself.
But wait, seeing this color depends entirely on my eyes, my brain activity. Doesn't that make it mental?
Russell's counter is that this dependence is physiological, not mental. It's part of a physical causal chain. Think about looking through colored glasses. The reddish appearance you see depends on the physical glasses, but the glasses are physical, the light is physical, the interaction is physical. Your sense organs and brain are just more links in that physical chain. The appearance itself is a physical event happening at a particular location in space-time.
So the redness I see isn't in my mind, but is a physical occurrence related to my brain state and the external object.
That's the core idea. And to handle the fact that appearances vary with perspective, he introduces the concept of sensibilia. These are like potential sense data. They have the same status as sense data. They are physical appearances, but they don't need to be actually perceived by a mind to exist.
So there's a view of this room from that corner, even if no one's standing there. Sensibilia.
Exactly. Sensibilia are the appearances the world presents from all possible perspectives. All sense data, what we actually perceive, are sensibilia, but there are countless other sensibilia that aren't being perceived by anyone right now.
Okay. So where do things like tables and chairs fit in? Are they separate from these appearances?
This is where the logical construction comes in, inspired by mathematics. Russell argues that physical objects, things, are not some hidden substance behind the appearances. Instead, they are logical constructions built out of classes or collections of sensibilia.
So a table isn't a thing that has appearances. It is the whole set of its actual and possible appearances, sensibilia related in stable ways.
Precisely. It's a radical shift. The thing is a convenient way of bundling together a vast collection of related appearances from different viewpoints and times. It's a logical fiction, but a very useful one, constructed from the actual stuff of the world, the sensibilia.
How does this handle illusions or dreams? If I dream of a pink elephant, is that pink elephant appearance physical?
Russell would say the immediate object you're aware of in the dream, the pink elephant sense datum, is a real sensibility. It exists in your private dream space perspective at that moment. The unreality comes not from the appearance itself being non-existent, but from its lack of correlation with other sensibilia in the way we expect from real objects in public space.
Ah, so the dream elephant doesn't connect causally or spatially with the rest of the world in the normal way. Its relationships are unusual.
Exactly. The appearance is given. The problem is the inferences we might draw about its connections to other things. He thinks labels like real and unreal often cause confusion. The immediate data are always real as data. It's their context and correlations that determine if they belong to what we call a physical object or an illusion.
So matter, or a thing, is essentially the whole class of its appearances. And we feel it's more real because those appearances are relatively stable and predictable, allowing us to formulate causal laws.
That's a great summary of it. The stability and usefulness for prediction give the construction thing its feeling of solidity.
Okay, that's a fascinating way to think about perception and objects. What about causality? Does his scientific lens change how we should think about cause and effect?
It does. He critiques the traditional common sense notion, often based on volition, like, I pushed it so it moved, which implies a necessary connection or a simple sequence. Science, he argues, doesn't really operate with that simple model.
It's more complex than just billiard balls hitting each other.
Much more. Scientific laws often describe relationships between different states of a system over time, frequently expressed mathematically using differential equations. These relate a state to its rate of change, showing continuous evolution rather than discrete cause-effect events.
So it's about finding constant relationships, patterns of change, not a simple push.
Right. And he's skeptical of arguments assuming that causes must resemble their effects, like the idea that something noble like consciousness must have an equally noble cause existing eternally. Science shows causes and effects can be vastly dissimilar states.
What about the uniformity of nature? The idea that the same cause always produces the same effect.
Russell argues the scientific version isn't quite that simple. It's more about the belief in the permanence of laws. We assume the fundamental relationships described by laws, like gravity, will continue to hold. But, critically, this belief is an empirical generalization based on past observation. It's highly probable, but not logically certain or known a priori. We rely on induction.
And he mentions relatively isolated systems.
Yes, that's important practically. Science makes progress by identifying systems where external influences are minimal enough that we can study the internal dynamics and formulate approximate laws. Finding such systems, like the solar system for studying gravity, is partly, as he says, a matter of good fortune. The universe didn't necessarily have to be structured so conveniently for us.
So what about determinism? Is the future fixed by the past and the laws?
Russell treats this as a purely scientific, empirical question, not something philosophy can decide beforehand. Scientific determinism, for him, would mean that the state of the universe at one time, combined with the universal laws, expressed as differential equations, mathematically fixes the state at all other times. Whether this is actually true of our universe is for physics to find out.
It's not a metaphysical necessity.
No. And this leads into free will. Whether our volitions, our choices, are themselves determined by prior causes, physical or psychological, is, again, a question of fact for science, particularly psychology and neuroscience, perhaps.
And our feeling of freedom doesn't settle it.
No, he argues introspection is unreliable here. The feeling of making a free choice doesn't prove that the choice wasn't causally determined. He separates the factual question of determination from any ethical implications.
Okay, so we have this picture of reality built from appearances, governed by probable laws. How do we actually come to know any of this? Russell makes a really key distinction here, doesn't he?
Yes, absolutely fundamental to his epistemology. The distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description.
Acquaintance sounds like direct contact.
It is.
Yeah.
Direct awareness of something without any intermediary process of inference or judgment. The prime examples are your immediate sense data, the color you're seeing right now, the sound you hear. Also, awareness of your own memories or your internal states through introspection, like being aware of your own awareness, or perhaps universals like redness or similarity.
Things we just know directly.
Yes. Russell is actually quite strict about what we can be acquainted with. Maybe only this, referring to a current sense datum, and I, our awareness of self, are true proper names for particulars we're acquainted with.
And knowledge by description, that's everything else.
Pretty much everything complex. It's knowing that something is the so-and-so. We know physical objects, like this table, by description as the thing causing such and such sense data. We know other people's minds by description, the mind associated with that body behaving in that way. We know historical figures, like Julius Caesar, by description, the Roman general who crossed the Rubicon.
We weren't there. We weren't acquainted with Caesar.
Exactly. We know him through descriptions passed down. Even most proper names, like London or Bertrand Russell for most people, function as descriptions, the capital of the UK, the author of Principia Mathematica.
But how can we think or talk about things we only know by description if all thought needs direct acquaintance?
This is the crucial link. Russell's theory of descriptions provides the answer. He argues that any proposition or judgment that we can understand, even if it seems to be about something known only by description, must ultimately be analyzable into constituents with which we are acquainted.
So if I think the first chancellor of the German Empire was astute, I don't need to be acquainted with Bismarck himself.
Correct. The actual Bismarck is not a direct component of your thought. What your thought is composed of, according to Russell's analysis, is something like, there exists one and only one entity, X, such that X was the first chancellor of the German Empire, and X was astute. The components of this proposition are concepts like existence, uniqueness, first chancellor German Empire, astute universals or logical concepts with which you can be acquainted, or further descriptions analyzable down to acquaintance.
So the description allows us to structure thoughts about things beyond our immediate awareness, using only materials from our direct awareness.
Exactly. It connects the limited sphere of our direct acquaintance to the vast world we talk and think about. It's a powerful piece of logical analysis that bridges that gap. It relies heavily on the tools of modern logic, dealing with variables and existence claims. Some, all, the.
Okay, pulling all these threads together then. Applying this scientific, logical approach that Russell champions seems to lead to a really different kind of philosophy.
It really does. It consciously moves away from trying to make the universe conform to our wishes, our ethical intuitions, or our sense of importance. It prioritizes objectivity, careful analysis, building from evidence, like sense data, using logical tools.
Even if the resulting picture is strange or counterintuitive, like infinite sets or objects as logical constructions.
Especially then, it accepts that the world revealed by logic and science might be very different from our common sense view and independent of our desires. The goal is clarity and truth, following the method rigorously.
We've covered a lot of ground here, this deep dive into Russell's push for a science-informed philosophy. We saw him tackle that core conflict with mysticism, champion the scientific method, and particularly math, reshape our view of perception and objects, analyze causality, and clarify how we know things through acquaintance and description.
It's a really coherent, if challenging, vision for what philosophy can be. Grounded, rigorous, yet still exploring profound questions about reality and knowledge. It shows how abstract tools like logic can illuminate the concrete world.
It definitely offers a specific way to think about philosophy. So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. If Russell is right, if philosophy should draw its methods and spirit from science, and science tends to describe a world operating by objective, impersonal laws, a world perhaps without inherent purpose or built-in human values. How do we live in that world? How do we square that objective picture with our own subjective lives, our feelings, our search for meaning, our ethical compass? If the universe isn't inherently friendly or meaningful in a human sense, how do we create or find meaning within it? That's quite a challenge, isn't it? Something to mull over.